Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
We good back there? Yeah, all right. I'm getting the thumbs up. Well, great. Appreciate everyone coming to the last session of this year's Oregon Housing Conference. We're excited to have the finale to talk to you about some of our experiences on design build and talk a little bit about how it can be a good delivery method for affordable housing for all the projects that we're working on together. So starting off at a high level, design build is a little bit different than the traditional design bid build that I think we're all pretty familiar with. Design build changes up the contractual relationship so that the owner is contracting directly with the design builder, which is a partnership that the architect and general contractor have formed to go after a particular project. And I think what we'll talk about is it really creates a very collaborative team environment where everyone is rowing in the same direction. Really is a partnership that's formed to meet the goals of the owner, and it's a joy to work on design build projects because of that. So I'm joined with my colleagues at Walsh, Holst Architecture, and Home Forward. And after brief introductions, we're going to go into two case studies, and then we're going to do a panel discussion about why design build might be right for the projects you're looking at, and what makes a good design build team. As we go along, we will have Q&A at the end, but please, pipe up with any questions. We'd really like to make this a discussion. So feel free to raise your hand, and I'll try to find you and call on you as we go. So with that, I'm going to start things off. My name is Bennett Barnwell. I'm a senior project manager for Walsh Construction, and I've had the great opportunity over the last 10 years or so to work on many design build projects. And as I said, I really like this procurement method because of the teamwork it fosters. It's just a very enjoyable project to be part of, where everyone on the team is working together for a common goal. And that is, in the cases I've been involved in, to create better housing for the residents that need it. I've also, last year, I went through the Design Build Institute of America training to become a design build professional. So if any of you are interested in that or looking into that, I'd be more than happy to answer questions at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Hello. I'm Leslie Crehan. I'm a senior project manager at Home Forward. I'm going to give you the owner's perspective on design build. I've been at Home Forward for 33 years and have done numerous design build projects.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dave Oddie. I'm a principal and owner at Holst Architecture. Holst is a firm here in town, and now with a small satellite in Minneapolis. We have been in business since 1992, and we've been a women-owned business and disadvantaged business since 2017. And I've had the pleasure of working on all the projects that you'll see in the case studies today with Walsh and Home Forward. It's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, my name is Marty Dean. I'm a designer and project manager at Holst Architecture. I project managed and was on the design team for one of the case studies that we're looking at today, the Hillsborough Shelter. And, being a designer at Holst, really involved in equity work, housing work, trauma-informed design principles, the values that we have at that architecture firm.
Hello, everyone. I'm Allie Lamanna. I'm a project manager with Walsh Construction. I've been in the construction industry for just over 13 years now. My education is actually in architecture, so I really love projects, especially the design build, with being able to really work closely with the design team on these projects and really have a collaborative team atmosphere. So looking forward to tell you guys more about it.
All right, so with that, we're going to jump into our first case study, which is 85 stories. I'll let Leslie take it from there.
So Home Forward started, do you want to advance it
yep.
one?
Oh, you want to advance one?
Yeah. Home Forward started with looking at doing design build with our elevator served properties. So high rises, not really on some of them, but and it started with 10 properties. They were all under public housing subsidies, and the public housing subsidy was not enough to keep the building running. These mainly were built in the 1970s, and they needed a lot of upgrades. And so we looked at a new subsidy through HUD called Section 18. And we applied for the Section 18 funding, received it, and we were able to start with 4 projects, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Our main goals, as you can see, were to continue to serve the same very low income population currently housed in these properties, continue to own and manage each of these properties, improve the physical condition of the properties, and improve the financial performance. So those were our main goals. The first, oh, actually, well, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. We started out with 4 high rises. Actually, none of them are represented on this slide quite yet. But, and those were Selwood Center, Hollywood East, Gallagher Plaza, and Northwest Tower. We grouped them into 2 groups. So Selwood and Hollywood were together. Gallagher and Northwest Tower were together in that group. And they were all occupied rehab. So we had to renovate these, keeping the residents housed in the building while we were renovating, which was very challenging. And so for that reason, we felt the design build was the best way to go for a contractual relationship. After we did the first 4 groups, which some of them were smaller, just kind of financial kind of switches, we then went through and are doing the rest of our groups. So we've gone through all 5, 6, and 7. We have yet to do group 8. That'll be our next group that we're going to do. This involved 2,750 units in total. Each group is about 300 to 350 units per group, and involves 7 to 9 different sites. And some of the complexity of this is that they share a financial relationship. So when you have like something that you want to add or do different on one building, you have to make sure that the other ones can take the hit if you need to take more money for one of the other ones. So it's a very challenging relationship.
Go to the next slide. Yeah. So I think in terms of the case study, what we want to do is focus on the projects that the 3 of us worked on together out of those 85 stories. And so you'll see here on the slide, these are before shots of 5 properties. Northwest Tower, Northwest Tower is it's in the Alphabet District of Northwest Portland. Grace Peck, which is in Irvington. Selwood Center, which is the tallest building in Selwood. Gallagher Plaza, also in the Alphabet District of Northwest Portland, and then similarly Medallion Apartments. So 3 of them are in Northwest Portland. Like Leslie said, all of these projects were occupied all the way through construction, which adds a high degree of difficulty in terms of coordination. All of these properties were pretty distressed in terms of their exterior envelope, their HVAC systems, The general fit and finish of the units and the community spaces, they all, had been mildly updated since they were first built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Holst got the chance to join Walsh in pursuing the first four projects. And we also had a partner architect, Casa Architecture. Kevin Saxton was part of our team as well. And so Holst did three of the buildings: Selwood, Gallagher, and Northwest Tower. And then, not pictured here, Kevin worked on the Hollywood East building. So anyway, highly complex. All these projects are intermingled with financing, with schedules. And so having design build be sort of the mechanism by which we keep everything organized was really essential. The other piece I wanted to hit on was, when we were balancing budgets across multiple projects, how do you have a value system that helps you decide what you're going to do? So basically, Leslie and Home Forward had a pot of money that was available for four buildings. And it was up to Home Forward and our design build team to identify what was the best use of that money. And so what we did was we came up with 5 criteria that we weighed every possible scope item against. Those were things that were code required that we were probably going to have to do no matter what. Safe exiting. Many of these projects were not built to current seismic codes. None of them were. And so how do we provide the most seismic upgrades possible within our budget that allowed people to get out safely in the event of the Cascadian earthquake? Resource efficiency. How do we provide upgrades to the buildings that would be the most energy efficient, that would make the buildings need to use less energy altogether? Health and well-being. How do we improve the lives of those living in these buildings as well as those working in these buildings, for cleaner air, for a nicer environment? And then finally, opportunity. Opportunity was the one sort of criteria that I think where design build really came into play, because working closely with Walsh and Home Forward, we were able to identify things that, hey, while we're doing this, we could also do this because we're already tearing this apart, or we're already, moving people out temporarily. And so that opportunity piece is really one where I think if we'd been in a traditional sort of CMGC situation or design bid build, where we might have missed some opportunities. And so it was leveraging that partnership to be able to get the most bang for the buck for the client. And so that process involved a very lengthy programming exercise, because we had probably about at least 2 times as many scope items as we could afford to do. And so it was trying to prioritize, sometimes horse trade between buildings, but basically figure out how are we going to do the most with the money that we have. And so if you go to the next photo, you'll see those same 5 properties where they are now. Most of these buildings all got new exterior envelope, better insulation, new windows, all new HVAC systems, upgraded electrical, upgraded interiors, especially around community rooms. And I think one of the great parts about working with Home Forward is, they also have to own and maintain these properties for a very long time. And so quality was a real driving force for a lot of our decision making. So we got to do some really high quality materials using, cement board systems like Oco-Skin, Swiss Pearl. We also did a lot of brick. And then really good wall assemblies where we're able to do rock wool exterior insulation, high quality windows, and then a whole series of upgrades on the insides of these buildings as well. One of the things that's been really fulfilling about these projects is having people say to us when they're done, like they thought they were new buildings, like completely transforming these places for folks that didn't have to move out, could maintain their housing all the way through. And by the time you're done, the buildings can last another 40 or 50 years. So, and I don't think that we would be able to have done as much on these projects as we did had it not been for the design build procurement method. So I think there were a couple examples we wanted to go through specifically on the insides of these buildings, or I know both inside and outside. So starting with Gallagher Plaza, just to give you an example of how design build really made a difference. This is sort of the backyard of Gallagher Plaza. On the left is before and on the right is after. And one of the things we made sure to do was involve the residents as much as possible in our decision-making process. And then work with Walsh to say, here, this is what we're hearing from the residents. This is what we're hearing from the resident service providers, the property management. Where can we make the biggest impact? And Gallagher was a building that folks really loved the outside, to be on the outside of the building. It's in a gorgeous neighborhood. People wanted to get outdoors, but the backyard was pretty tired. It had a lot of drainage issues. Needed a lot of help to really make it a special place. And people use these backyard spaces for all sorts of things, whether it was for their pets, for smoking, for gathering, for barbecuing, for gardening, and everything was very ad hoc. And so by making that a priority in our decision-making process, we were able to get a lot more site work in than we originally thought. And now the outside of the building is basically transformed into a series of spaces that are really well loved by the residents. And we were able to get that scope into the budget. So now we've got the smoking shelter, we've got a barbecue area, we have a pet area, garden beds. And then on the front side of the building, we have spaces where people can wait for rides, undercover, small little garden areas where people can gather. Basically, the outside of the building was completely transformed, and I know that the neighborhood has been extremely happy with the outcome as well by seeing how the building was upgraded. The next example I wanted to talk about was at Selwood, at the Selwood Tower. So where in Gallagher, a lot of the residents really wanted upgrades on the outside of the building. In Selwood, what we found out was that there was this community of folks that really loved to come together and cook and provide meals for one another almost on a daily basis. And you can see before the kind of kitchen that they were dealing with and then what we were able to provide after. Obviously, the kitchen got bigger, but this was in a building that was all concrete, was basically the ground floor was all pilotis. And so we had a lot of really major seismic issues of earthquake danger for Selwood, probably more so than any other project in Home Forward's portfolio. And so we worked really hard with our engineers at ABHT to come up with the best ways to pin this building to the ground for safe exiting to make sure that the pilotis don't fall over with a big earthquake. Through that process, we were able to, because we had to get access to every column and every footing on that ground floor, we were able to rearrange the entire ground floor to be a smarter layout. And knowing that this was a big deal for the residents about the kitchen, we were able to work with Walsh to figure out the phasing, the scheduling, the sequencing about how we could basically triple the size of the kitchen and be smart with the arrangement of the ground floor spaces. And I think without having that that kind of shared goal, like I think CMGC we do all the time. But there's a back and forth in CMGC that is kind of like, here, we'll toss out an idea to you, GC. GC tosses back a price or a constraint back to the architect, and it's this sort of give and take. And then in design build, it's more like we're doing this together and we're talking every day and we're working in the same room trying to find solutions. And so I think that this kitchen specifically, now it is so well loved by the residents, would not have happened if we had been in a CMGC type of relationship.
Yeah, a couple other things I wanted to touch on there that that Dave alluded to was, as you can imagine, we have 4 buildings with a multitude of stakeholders, within Home Forward. And so Holst and Walsh would be having meetings, like Dave said, almost every day on a particular issue to work through a particular programming challenge. And then we would come back to the bigger group. And I remember, like, quarterly, we would have huge meetings with all the stakeholders, and we would update the team on the direction that we were proposing we go, and we get buy-in kind of every step of the way. And these projects were on a tight time frame. We had a year to get through pre-construction on these 4 buildings, get it ready for construction. And really, I mean, without an integrated team that was working kind of hand in hand, I think it would be a very tall order to have gotten through that, to the point where we could start construction. And then construction was anywhere from 10 to 14 months. So again, pretty constrained. We were working around occupied units. And I think one of the like little intricacies, like the way that we're sequencing the project, how are different materials coming together, based on how that sequence is going, be able to work with Dave's team on, okay, well, what about this? If we have this cider go first, and then we're going to take off, and go the next elevation with this phase, how is that really going to work? Working through the constructability, I think at the end of the day, ended up saving Home Forward a lot of money from not a lot of RFIs. I think each of these projects had somewhere in the range of 30 to 40, 50 RFIs. So quite a lot less than you would normally see. So those are some of the costs and kind of schedule savings that I think you can start to see through this integrated method. So next, Marty and Allie, you guys want to take it away with the Hillsborough shelter?
Go to the next one. All right, so this is the Hillsborough shelter. This was a project that the city of Hillsborough is doing in partnership with Washington County. This was originally a traditional design bid build project. They had a different design team in place, and were working on the project, and just kind of kept running into budget issues that ended up killing the project. So they put it back out from a progressive design build proposal, and brought us on and pretty much said that, our project goals are that we need to have 75 beds. They need to be a mix of congregate and non-congregate. We want it to be trauma-informed design, and we have a hard budget that we do not have any more funds for. So with that, they turned it over to us, and we really took it and redid all of the programming, started over from scratch. And using the design build process, we were able to work through a lot of conceptual ideas very early on, with looking at, there was a existing building on the site, so whether or not we were going to be able to reuse that, whether or not for the non-congregate sleeping areas, the pods, that if we were going to do those as pre-manufactured, or if we were going to stick build them on site, as well as trying to decide on whether or not the services for that were going to be split between the congregate and non-congregate, or all together. So I'm going to turn it over to Marty to talk about what we came up with.
Awesome. Thanks, Allie. I get to talk about the site of the Hillsborough shelter, which was to Allie's point, a really exciting project for all of us. Speaking to the condensed timeline, I would say that was one of the things as well, request from the client to start with conceptual design in January of 2024, and to have, the whole process in for permit through design development by the summer of 2024. And we did go in for a permit in September of this year. So we went through the whole process, concept to permit, and maybe that was 7 or 8 months, teaming up between Walsh and Holst, and really keeping in mind all those values that Allie talked about, trauma-informed perspective. This site is on the west side of Hillsborough, near Tualatin Valley Highway, TV Highway, and Southwest 17th Avenue. It's 3 tax lots that we've combined into one to service both the congregate, which are the folks, the sheltered folks inside of the building, and the non-congregate, which is the pod style living. So we made, as to Ali's point, we made really early decisions about the site regarding if those pods were going to be, these pods were going to be stick built or modular. And we found out really early on that the modular was more expensive to actually prefabricate off-site and deliver. So we went stick built based off of that feedback from Walsh. As well as kind of considerations about how much of the site we were going to take up with the project. That was something that we really thought about early on. We didn't do a full land bank, but we had the option of not taking up and being a bit more conservative from the budget perspective of how much of the site we were occupying. So that was something that we got a lot of really early design feedback and the design build process as well. So what we did, we arranged 40 pods outside, in addition to a congregate shelters building that houses 36 beds for houseless folks inside of the building. There's 3 main user groups on the site, and to Ali's point about programming, we went through an extensive process with outreach with the shelter operators, as well as City of Hillsborough and Washington County. So we really understood their programmatic needs in this project. And one of the really interesting ways that this site is configured is thinking about the difference between the people who live in the pods and the folks who live inside of the congregate shelter. And how did we serve both of those populations with the shared resources of like the hygiene facility, the dining facility, because the shelter provides 3 meals a day. And a lot of, I think the hygiene facility is a really big component of this, of providing toilets and restrooms and showers. So our design is rooted in where that overlap is, allowing for access to the building from the outside just for the folks who live in the pods, as well as, access to those programs from inside the building as well. So if you're living in the pod shelters, you actually don't have to go into the building to be serviced by the dining facility or the hygiene facility. That was something that we really wanted to keep important. So that's located over in this area. And then staff was a big consideration as well. In trauma-informed design principles, we wanted to make sure that the staff had their own space for respite and relaxation. So there's a lot of amenities just sort of in this administrative quarter, efficient quarter of the building that serves staff and gives them their own space. Community came up a lot, how to build community on a site like this. So we arranged the pods in small courtyards with a lot of landscaping and choice and autonomy in the wayfinding that went through the site. We didn't want to create too large of communities and overwhelm people, meet them where they're at. So there's a lot of choice again and how much they want to interact or how independent they want to be on the site. We also had a chance to do 2 dog parks. So there's a dog park in the south side of the site and a dog park on the north side of the site. That gives residents a choice of where they want to go. Sub-social groups can form without, as much conflict, and gives them that autonomy and choice. Parking was a huge component of this, allowing for residents that had cars to keep them close by. Keeping all possessions in close proximity is really important, but also for van and medical service vans that come to access. So we were able to design a actual location for those to kind of park and come on site and serve residents and guests. What else can I say? I think the whole kind of interior entryway is designed to provide shelter. That was really the keystone of the project, but to protect from these sort of outside elements of both the TV highway and Southwest 17th, which is kind of a busy intersection. So you'll see that a lot of the program on the site is pointed indoors. I think I could check my notes. I think that's all I had for that slide. I go on to the next one. Okay, this is an aerial view of the site configuration, showing just that arrangement of the pods, the landscaping in between, and how it interacts with the congregate shelter space. And these are some early renderings. So we're set to start construction December from this December 2nd. So we're still in that phase where, we have renderings right now. But this is the main dining lounge facility on the left here. And we've created a bit of a grounding hearth experience with the media unit and the entertainment center, so that, there's something to orient to in the space. There's acoustic paneling to, dampen the sound in the space, and color is really important for that wayfinding, that trauma-informed perspective of wayfinding through the space. So the blue colors are sort of these general open shared spaces between people. The reception area where guests get oriented to the space. And then the bottom right is the congregate sleeping pods that are in the back of the shelter space. So everybody has their own nook when they're inside the building, their own bed, their own storage. We designed down to the detail of where the utility outlets go and, how people are going to keep their items safe. So that was a nice part of the project. Outdoors, these are the pod style living, which we ended up doing stick built, as we mentioned. Rain coverage and autonomy were really important. I think we decided to put money into kind of that weather protection, as well as, I would say 100% of these pods are ADA accessible. So we did the whole site ADA accessible, and we didn't want to lose any. That was another place that we put a lot of investment, I think, is just to make sure that the whole site was accessible. And the bottom right is the hygiene facility, which has it's another investment in the project for the budget, but it was worth it, was to bring natural light into that hygiene center because it has so many closed off showers and toilets and stalls. It felt important from that trauma-informed perspective to bring light down, not to make it so dark and cramped in there, and to provide really clear sight lines. It's also not a gendered restroom, so we wanted to make sure that, visibility around every corner. You can notice that the walls are actually curved inside the hygiene facility as well, and that was another design move just to kind of soften blind corners for people in these sort of large shared spaces. Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I just add, kind of the whole part of the design build process of working closely with Holst is we were able to really focus on, with a limited budget, to say that, we really worked collaboratively to figure out how could we make sure that the dollars were being put towards the user experience in the building, as opposed to just kind of getting lost in places that wasn't necessarily going to be as useful, so that we could really focus on some of the things like the skylight into the hygiene space, as well as making all of the pods really accessible. That was a big part of why we didn't go the modular route, was looking at the existing Safe Rest Village they have there. A lot of people complained that they couldn't get up into the hygiene areas, that the pods themselves were hard to get into and access. So we were able to work really closely together to figure out, making sure that we were really targeting where that money was going.
And even back to the beginning when Hillsborough put out the RFP for a design builder, our early conversations with Walsh about should we team up and go after this? It's like, well, if the first team couldn't figure out the budget, how are we going to figure out the budget? Where can we actually make meaningful change right out of the gate? And that's where getting Walsh's perspective early on was super helpful, because we were able to go into the interview proposing to use less site. And we're like, we think we can do the same program in 3/4 of the site that you have available. We're not exactly sure how. We heard some ideas. We had some general, sketches and thoughts, but we thought right out of the gate, that's one way that we can bring this project back into budget. And so by having that, back to those aligned values and those shared goals, having that agreement at the very beginning saved a lot of time and a lot of back and forth in having us work together on how to save the money. Another piece that I want to make sure that we talk about, and we're probably going to cover it more in the panel questions, but I want to make it clear, is that we didn't sacrifice design on any of these projects at any point. We didn't sacrifice connection to the client or the amount of conversations and iterations and the sort of things that we love to do as architects, those are exactly the same as in any other project. It's just more about the assumption of teamwork versus what can happen sometimes with the assumption of kind of taking your different sides. And I think that's really important, because I think a lot of people think, oh, design build, that just means that the contractor is going to make all the decisions. It's going to be the lowest cost, is going to be the driver. The client's not going to get to talk to the architect, and the contractor is going to gatekeep the architect. And that has not been the case in any of these projects at all.
And I can add to that too, as far as on an owner's perspective, because really when you hire your architect, they're kind of looking out for you as the owner, and what the contractor is doing. They're going out, looking at the site, doing punch lists and stuff like that. And never during any of these projects did I feel that Holst was not looking out for our best interest as an owner too.
Great. Well, yeah, I think both of those are great examples of, if you have a specific challenge as an owner, how design build can help you get there, whether it's a tight budget, a schedule, or just, things aren't working out, or you have a occupied renovation where you need a creative solution. So next, we'd like to talk a little further about, well, you're thinking about a project. Why would you maybe go the design build route, and how can you help make that be successful? So Leslie, first question to you is, when your team at Home Forward is thinking about a project, what are the reasons that you might go design build versus CMGC or a more traditional delivery method?
Yeah, well, first off, you have to figure out whether you can do design build or not. So some agencies may have procurement rules that would not allow you. You have to take a low bid situation. We were able to do design build on these, and so our procurement rules allowed for it. Secondly, sometimes there's instances where you might want to just hire the architect because you're just doing some preliminary, programming and stuff like that. So you want just the architect to just get some initial ideas. But when we came to these, as far as the occupied rehab, it was best for us to do the design build. We wanted that cohesive partnership. When you do a more traditional contractual relationship, you're hiring the contractor and you're hiring the architect, and you hope that they kind of get together and things work out. Mm-hmm. In design build, you are just hiring the contractor, and they've brought in a partner that they know they can work with. And so you've already kind of created that cohesive relationship right there. It also opens an opportunity for sometimes smaller architecture firms or even contractors that haven't done design build to make a partnership with someone that has. So CASA, who was on the first group of ours, they were a smaller architecture firm, hadn't done design build before, and Walsh was able to bring them on as a partner. So it's kind of a way in to the process also for those that may be out there that want to do design build and haven't done it before. And then and an attribute also is, do they have, the collective experience? So like I said, looking at, does at least the contractor or the architect or both, if you're an ideal situation, have that experience that you need for a project. And with the occupied rehab, they're very complex projects. And so the design build really is suited for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie. You touched a little bit on how important the partnership is. Dave, when our teams are looking to work together, can you talk a little bit from an architect standpoint about what you're looking for in a general contractor partnership, kind of what that relationship, what you want that to look like?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to those shared values and making sure that that the bottom line isn't just about money or time or expediency, that it's about the people that we're serving. It's about our clients, it's about the residents, it's about the folks that work in these buildings and facilities. And that your partnership is based on serving them. And so, you know, I've been part of design build relationships that haven't worked out quite as well. And sometimes well, I will say every time that comes from a misalignment of values and different goals. So I think working towards a common goal is absolutely necessary if you're going to consider a design build relationship. And just making sure that you can work together. I mean, it's the same thing like when you're choosing, you know, your engineering teams that are going to help you out. Relationships are so important in the kind of work that we do because nobody can do it all, right? And so why that relationship shouldn't also extend to the contractor architect relationship seems like that's a natural thing that we should head towards.
Yeah. Yeah. I think trust is so important on any team. And when you're partnering on a design build, I mean, we know that there's going to be challenges along the way, and having that kind of backbone or that fallback of we're in this together, we trust each other, we've got each other's best interest at heart, really is what gets you through the challenges and makes it successful. So yeah, totally agree that relationship foundation is key. Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to add, because Leslie kind of touched on it, is I think the design build relationship on especially the home forward projects, well, the shelter as well, allowed us to open opportunities to other partners that we might have not felt confident enough to take a leap on. Whether it's bringing in a new interior design firm that hasn't gotten any public work before, or up and coming landscape architecture firm that's, you know, a single practitioner who's a woman. You know, giving opportunities to folks because you've got this really core nucleus of the architect and contractor on the same page, that we feel like we have the capacity and the bandwidth to help build up folks that are entering into the industry. So I don't think that we would have been able to do that as much if those projects had been CMGC.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Just to add on to that as well, is also useful from a subcontract standpoint, bringing on some newer subcontractors that aren't necessarily used to doing projects like this, and being able to really increase the diversity, being able to talk through with the design team while we're putting details together to say, hey, this is a little bit complex with how you've got this designed. Is there a way that we could simplify it? Because I think there's going to be a less sophisticated sub working on this, and being able to have those conversations during design using the procurement in mind while we're doing it is really useful.
So let's say we have a team like that. They're all on the same page, working together. Leslie, from an owner's perspective, what kind of benefits and efficiencies does that gain you, you know, as we work through the project?
Yeah, well, one of the things is it consolidates the risk as far as for the owner. And so managing just a single contract rather than two contracts makes it a lot easier on the owner's perspective. We had a lot of exterior a skin replacement on these first 10 high rises that we were going to be doing. And that's a high risk for the owner, because that's where we typically get problems later on, is water intrusion. And so for us, when we have these exterior envelope type buildings, we like to do design build. And for example, this is a medallion that one of the buildings that was design build. We used an Oco skin for the exterior envelope. And it 3 years after it was completed, we noticed some cracking in the Oco skin. And so instead of having to call up the architect and call the contractor and say, we need a solution here, I just went straight to the contractor and said, you know, this needs to get fixed because we shouldn't have cracking just 3 years out. So that's how that helped a lot. The other thing too is the destructive investigations that we needed to go through with the existing buildings. We asked Walsh to go in to a unit that was unoccupied and just take all the walls out, especially all the ones that had mechanical plumbing in them, to see what we were dealing with, because that helps us later down the road to know that we don't have any surprises. And so that destructive investigation was done both with the architect and the contractor in those early stages, and we were able to come up with solutions quickly that were within the budget that we had.
Yeah.
So for instance, you know, when we're doing destructive demolition, you know, investigative demolition, if it was CMGC, I could see scenarios where you'd get into scopes or schedule impacts or things that maybe the contractor didn't assume, but the architect did, or vice versa. And the owner has to then be navigating that difference of opinion of what do we need to do. Versus when we came on board, it's like, all right, Bennett, you tell us where, when and where we'll be there, and we're gonna, you know, survey everything. And we're basically following Walsh's lead. And so that way that takes it off of Leslie's plate, takes it off of the client's plate. And then I just have an anecdote because it's kind of crazy. When we did demolition of Sellwood, we had a unit completely open with no resident, and I'm wandering through there with some folks from Walsh, and I fiddle with things, and I was fiddling with drywall tape that was at a windowsill, and I pulled on it, and the entire sheet of chipboard came off the wall, and it was all black mold inside that wall. And so it's a crazy anecdote, but it also talks about I probably wouldn't have been there to do that and experience that if it hadn't been design build and I wasn't working hand in hand with Walsh. And so I think that it just opens up those opportunities, good or bad, to figure out how can we make our projects better.
All right, yeah, Leslie and Dave, you talked about it earlier as well. Yeah, there's a concern, I think, out there with owners that, well, if I go design build, I'm losing the creativity and the you know, the touch point with the architect. And I think all of the case studies did a good job of, you know, kind of debunking that myth. From an architect's perspective, Marty, I mean, how do you see kind of still being able to get your kind of creative juices flowing and still having, you know, what's the best way that you see of still having the connection with the owner, even though contractually you're working for the general contractor?
Yeah, contracts are very important in setting up these projects. We all know that. I think in terms of how it sets up the workflow and the relationships, it has a big impact on that. So my PM project management hat side is thinking about the importance of that language. But as a designer, I really think good design is about the end user and the values in the project, and the end user being the client, but not just the client. I think Dave touched on this as well, but actually the people who are touching and living on the site or in the building every single day. So that is within, you know, our values as at Holst, but as designers, that is really centered on good design principles. And I think in terms of the collaboration piece for us, it's finding the partner and finding that in Walsh where they really also echo that in their own values and saw the importance of that. You know, from the beginning of our partnership, I think we all, for the Hillsborough shelter at least, we all aligned on those trauma-informed values and our stance on the need for this type of project in the community. So we had alignment there. And then also playing the different parts, it can feel very similar. I think there's a big trust component to this where the general contractor that we're working with in the design build situation really trusts the creative process of the architect on the team. I shoulder and Dave and I shoulder a lot of the contractual stuff for our team. And so our designers aren't always even privy to how the language changes, and they're allowed to do their thing and bring their full creativity to the project just as they would in any other certain type of arrangement. I think the main difference is really having the contractors sit early on in those sessions, those design sessions, and bring a different lens to it, whether it be through programming. You don't always get your PMs from the GC side and early on in those conversations. So I think they actually brought some really interesting design ideas, but didn't try to dictate our process at all. So I think to bring some reassurance that we get, if it's the right chemistry between the GC and architect, you get full reign of that expansion of dreaming big, the creativity, the process, and kind of scaling back on that in that regular cadence. But then also sometimes you get a great design idea too from the GC team that comes in, and it just adds to that collaboration and teamwork. So
we've talked a lot about the design build team, but there's another part of that triangle, which is the owner, that's crucial to a successful design build effort. Allie, can you speak a little bit about what a good owner in a design build setup is doing or not doing?
So it is really important that the owner is on board with the project and behind the whole idea of the design build process. Giving us those really strong goals at the beginning of a project to tell us, these are the main things that I want on the project, and really having the flexibility and the patience to kind of turn us loose to figure out the best solution to those goals, and being able to make timely decisions early on in the project is really key to the design build process.
Yeah, and you spoke about early decisions. How does that help the budget track? I mean, I think you guys talked about it a little bit on the site, that some of those early decisions really help things, all the way through. But can you just maybe elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody here is familiar that the earlier you make a decision on a project, the less cost impact it's going to have is decisions made very late in the design process. So it's really important that having those different conceptual ideas put out early and getting the feedback to say, what are some of these big moves that we could make on the design, and how is that going to impact the budget, so that as a team we could really start narrowing in all of the possibilities into what can actually fit within the budget and still align with those project goals that are the kind of touchstone throughout the design process.
And I think that also, I think it also saves a lot on the VE effort of going backwards, because you've made some really big moves early on, and so you're not getting to SD, where the architect traditionally kicks over a set of drawings, we price it, and then have to rework stuff. It's already been reworked so that the team can keep moving forward, and that inevitably ends up at a better set of drawings than spending a lot of time on VE.
I could add a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think, I learned a phrase, it's you should go slow to go fast. And I think where I really learned that was in the early days of the 85 Stories project. We spent a lot of time in the community room at Hollywood East, putting together that scope list with all of the stakeholders. And because everybody took the time to understand the budget, the options in front of us of what we could do, and then to build consensus with the group. That was a very intentional effort, and it made the rest of the process, the rest of the design process and construction process much, much easier. And I can't think of a single time on any of the Home Forward occupied rehabs or on the shelter where something came back as a surprise. I mean, we did have to VE on the shelter, but we knew it. And Ally was in constant communication with Marty, and we knew that, hey, we're stretching on a few things. We're maybe some extra skylights or, trying to do some things that we wanted to get into the project, but we knew that those were going to be a heavy lift. And so we were all making educated decisions, and I can't think of a single surprise that we had that was related to our relationship the whole way through.
Maybe Dave, sticking with you for one more minute. Yeah, we've talked a lot about the schedule efficiencies. Is there anything to add on the just helping how design build helps eliminate some headaches for the owner and helps can you talk to that kind of schedule efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes from removing any of the variables, like or trying to eliminate or limit variables as much as possible. So usually architects don't create their schedule with the contractor. We make our schedule, we hand it to the CMGC, they hand it back with like, here's our milestones. And again, just like with the budgeting process, it's kind of like behind closed doors and we toss things over the fence and see what comes back. As opposed to, we got together with Dan and Ally and the Walsh team very early on and we co-built the schedule. And even before we won the project, there was a lot of work put into, okay, Hillsborough has some very aggressive goals about the timeline. Can we actually make this work? And we talked about staffing levels. We talked about what it was going to take to get the job done. And what that also did is it brought a lot of transparency and clarity to our fees. And it's not something that we talk a lot about, but in design build, the contractor's paying the architect just like they're paying their subcontractors. And so having that transparency with our work plans, with the staff that we're going to put on the project, and having the contractor understand what it takes to do some of these projects early on made the rest of it like just easy because we were all on the same page. So there's no like, oh, why are you adding on 2 people during CDs like that? Don't you already have your team or, whatever that is, like we already had the work plan in advance and already talked about it. So it just removes a lot of that static that can happen.
I can just add a little bit on as far as the owner's perspective. I think design build, we kind of think that it's a little more expensive, but in the long run, it isn't because of the consolidated risk that you are able to do, the collaboration, it saves in the long run on changes later down the road that might cost a lot more. So I think if you look at the initial numbers, maybe, but in the long run, I think it's equal or less expensive.
Great. All right. With that, we will turn it over to you. Any questions that you might have? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. That makes sense.
So this was a really informative presentation. Thank you. I appreciate it. As a project manager, Leslie, I'm wondering, what are sort of the top 3 things you think about doing when you're doing design build to make it a successful collaboration?
Right.
Well, I think the first thing is choosing the right team, right? So you have a project and not every team works for that project. So I think the right team is your first thing. And building that relationship with that team initially. Maybe that's the second thing as far as starting off with that whole team in the room together and working out what the budget is, what's the program, and how we're gonna get there. I don't know, the third thing, if I can come up with the third thing off the top of my head.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but I'll probably reach out to you guys separately because I know you all. But a couple of big picture questions that I had. I understand that both of those or the projects that were profiled were with a government owner, with the housing authority or the city. Well, shelter aside, one, I understand the procurement benefits for the government agencies because they have different limitations around that. So one is, were any of the 85-story ones financed with private financing, and the design build, and how did you manage the kind of traditional lender underwriting and cost and plan review for design build? And then the second kind of question, slightly related procurement wise, is that under a more traditional design bid build, if you have a robust pre-con for your GC, can you get to the same collaboration benefits that a design build provides?
You want to take the funding?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not a funding person. I'm more on the construction architecture side, but yeah, they did have OHCS funding in it. So there, and then there was private equity stuff too. So I don't know if do you remember?
Yeah,
what
I mean,
it-
yeah, they did work with banks, and
Yeah.
they did have permanent loan on all those projects. So in terms of nonprofits or affordable housing developers, I don't see many barriers from the funding side. You're still going to have the architects signing, the certificates or the guarantees that we always have to do. The lenders are still going to get to review everything all along the way. The contractor's not hiding anything. So I do think that there is a big avenue for even new construction and affordable housing. Like there's no reason why those projects can't be design build as well. Unless there are specific procurement rules within the agency that's acting as the client. I'm going to answer the one about CMGC and whether you can get the same outcome with a robust pre-con. I haven't seen it yet. So doesn't mean it can't be done, but I do think, just being blunt and honest, I think there's an inherent resistance to having complete dedication from a contractor during pre-con, whether it's allocation of resources, whether it's confidence that a project's going to move forward, whether it's the pre-con fee that they put in that only covers so much, that I have not seen that level of partnership and iteration and collaboration that we've had with these design build projects.
I think one thing though I would say on that is I think based on Walsh and Holst's relationship in the design build space, it's made our more traditional partnerships a lot better because we have that built trust and we will go talk to each other and say, hey, look, we're having some budget issues. What do you think we can do together? But I think in that, going back to your question, I think the inherent issue that you have in the CMGC setup is it's an arranged marriage of sorts versus when we're partnering and going after a project, we're fully committed to the team. And so I think there's just a barrier there that is hard to get over in the CMGC space. Did you have something, Dave, to add?
I agree.
Yeah. And I think on the funding side, yeah, regardless, the owner is going to have some pre-development funding kind of that they have to either procure, or I think sometimes you guys use your own capital funds, but regardless, you're still going to have the architecture fees, regardless. Any other questions out there?
Hi, with the opportunities for more energy efficient and high performing buildings, even net zero, I guess, given that adds some complexity and challenge, do you see a path for design build as being a good solution to meet those kinds of opportunities.
I can take a little bit of that as well.
I think it would be easier because you're giving the mandate to the contractor. I mean, design build doesn't necessarily mean that the contractor is the prime. Most cases, the contractor is the prime. And I think if you're giving that mandate to the contractor who ultimately has to get this thing bid and built, and they are, again, back to those shared values and shared goals, and they're bought onto that, that the designer and builder can work in tandem rather than back to that, like throwing things over the fence. I think the working in tandem can get you there a lot more efficiently. So yeah, I think the more complex a project is, almost the more design build makes sense.
I think the one caveat I guess I would say to that is Leslie talked earlier about the consolidation of risk. And so from a design builder's perspective, those complex projects or the passive house or the things that haven't been done as much do carry more risk for the design builder. So when we're looking at projects, we're pretty careful about which projects we go after from a design builder. It would definitely have to be the right owner and the right partnership for us to say, yeah, let's go after that, passive house or net zero. The trust and respect and that team, that triangle is so important when challenges come up. Anyone else out there?
So I work in places where it's probably impossible to do design build because of procurement regulations, and just having to do federal procurement requirements. It's really hard to do that. But occasionally a project comes along where I could, do more of a design build. And I'm wondering, when you do the procurement, do you procure for a team or do you procure individually the architect and the contractor?
Yeah, I mean, from the design builder's standpoint, we go in as a team. We want the opportunity to pick who we're partnering on that project with. So if an owner was doing a design build procurement and they were going after the GC and the architect separately, at least from Walsh's perspective, that wouldn't be an arrangement we'd want to pursue.
Yeah, we put out an RFP and it's for the team, the contractor architect team. Something just to say to the procurement rules too, Home Forward has similar regulations and stuff. And I knew this question would come up and I should have done my homework before I came. Because I was going to ask, there's some special process we had to go through to allow us to do the design build. And I forgot what that is, but I can find out and get you that information afterward. Yeah.
So we actually asked City of Hillsborough, who are working with on the project, a little bit about their experience and anything that they'd like to share for this. And that was actually one of them, is that they're looking at trying to do as many projects as possible, design build from the city standpoint, that they've really thought that it's been a very successful model for the projects that they've done it on, and that currently they have to get exemptions through the state to be able to do it. They are able to get those exemptions and do it, but they are lobbying the state right now to change it so that they won't have to go as an exemption route, that they can just do it.
And I know that when we've gotten that exemption, that we were it's like it holds for a certain amount of time. So you don't have to do it for every contract. Yeah.
And I will say, design build, even for new construction, is extremely common in other building types. Higher ed, student housing is very often design build. And so I think it's kind of interesting that the affordable housing world, at least in Oregon, hasn't really embraced that procurement method or that delivery method. because it's been successful in a lot of other project types.
Got a question back there.
This is just more of a clarification point. So I would say, and this is just reiterating the message for the teams, when you have a design build and you have a GC that is working as the primary in that capacity, just like when you have the architect that's working with other type of kind of variety, you'll want to make sure if you're going after a certification standard that there is a good communication that's flowing through all of those parties. Because we have had some experiences where there was, in very rare occasions, design build where there wasn't good communication. And there was unfortunately some missteps that were made in this that cost quite a bit of money on the project that wouldn't have not have happened if the communication was a little bit more fluid. So just as a kind of another nuance there, communication is always good for all parties involved, and then we keep that going and flowing through with all parties. This was a lead certification, and it was about a $250,000, fortunately, misstep.
Yeah, our fault, I'm sure. Yeah.
Thanks. As a follow-up to that, actually, when you set up your, sorry, back to procurement, kind of. So me as owner contracts directly with contractor, but then can you set it up that contractor then subs to architect, MEP, landscape, civil, energy certification, like you can put the whole thing under the contractor as opposed to having direct? All right, well, that answers.
Yeah.
Because that would mitigate it, right, Eric? Like if the contractor had the contract with the third party certifier potentially, or no?
Hmm. Yeah, I think definitely we normally set it up where the contract is from the owner to the contractor, but it could be to the architect. And then from the contractor to the architect, and typically Holst has all of the consultants underneath of them. But if we're doing like MEP design build, or if there's a specific consultant, sometimes it'll be direct to Walsh as well.
Can you touch base just a little bit on process and how you made sure you had alignment between the designer and the builder? Did you co-locate? Did you have pre-meetings before owner meetings? Like, how did you ensure you had alignment?
Sure. You want to start us off, Marty?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, open lines of communication, I think coming into Walsh and Holst has a very existing relationship. This is, a couple of projects have been done in this method. So communication flow is set up, I think, for that chemistry to exist. But, we have that typical process of going through design phases and getting pricing and budget conversations that happen specifically between the architect and the contractor in preparation. There's a lot of back and forth. On top of, those weekly OEC meetings with the client, there's also regular touch bases between the design team and the architecture team and the contractor team. Also, just direct lines of communication between, Ally and I as PMs on both sides, whether that be cell phone, texting, email, like we are very in tune with one another, I think, throughout the process, which feels good. I think the other thing I wanted to say about RFPs and kind of writing around design build, I think I noticed in the contract that I read through, or the RFP, that a lot of language gets pulled over from the design build process into procurement for a team for design build, but there's actually a very different process. If the owner group is open to kind of rewriting those deliverables, I think you can even save efficiency a bit more and really being open and clear with the design team and the GC about, we can minimize drawing types and specs, and we can create efficiencies in the project. If there's that open dialogue that we don't have to, the RFP can even be written differently, if that makes sense. So I think there's some education background that as well. And I was just going to say that.
Yeah, I'd say that, from a design build standpoint, that yes, we're one team. It's the same thing as working on with Ben and I working in the office. Marty and I are working closely together on our projects, which is a little different than, I'm also working with Holst on a typical CMGC project where we also have quite a lot of communication, but most of that is, at the OACs with the owner, because technically our contractual obligation is to the owner, their obligation to the owner. And the owner kind of has to be that intermediary between us. Whereas in the design build, we are a team, we're coming together to the owner. The owner doesn't have to facilitate that communication.
Mhm.
Also, if you think about it, the architect and the contractor have to get together prior to even getting the job, right? So they have to prepare to try to get, when the RFP comes out, they have to compete for that. So they've already met and talked about the project even before they've even been awarded it.
Mhm. Yep, a couple questions here. Who had their hand up first? Yeah, Cash.
I've just a two-part question. One, I guess I'm curious, do your milestone deliverables look different? And if so, how? And the second question is just, I guess I'm thinking about like a project that maybe doesn't actually result in construction, but it's like a big master planning phase. Is there value in doing design build with something like that?
Yeah, I think I'll take the first one a little bit and then I'll pass it over to you, Dave. I think the benefit in design build to the SD, DD, CD, it's the same deliverables, but we have a lot of input on, well, let's really dial in the details that are happening 100 times. Because those are the ones that are going to have the biggest budget impact. So we can really front load those details and to streamline the budget later on. So I think it's just working hand in hand on what are the things that are going to drive the budget.
Yeah, I think if it's a simple project, there are ways to condense phases where you might not have to have all the traditional phases. But we've always followed the same traditional path. But what Bennett said is what I was going to say is, like, I remember when we started on Medallion and the water heaters were the issue. Like, how are we going to deal with these water heaters? And so, like, even the first week, we were working on very detailed unit designs of how we were going to navigate the closet and water heater issue that we had to fix. And so we got into very fine grained detail right away, because we were going to have to do that. What was it, 100 times? 90 times. So and not that we wouldn't do that as CMGC, but I think the contractors viewpoint and like lens of how they see things, like they saw how important that was, that maybe the architect might not have realized how important that was. And so I think having that, like, hey, please take a look at this. We got to talk about this next week. Let's make sure we have all of our ducks in a row. Like, that really helped to get that guidance from Walsh. Oh, and then to your master planning question, Fiona, that one I'm not sure about. I mean, I think it all depends on what the goals are of what you're trying to do. If you have a highly complex master plan that includes phasing, has a lot of logistics, then I think it could make a lot of sense. If it's much more kind of like open and flexible, and you're not as worried about time, money, the details, then maybe you don't need it. Design build isn't as helpful. But I do think that having the contractor being a guiding force along with the architect can really help complex problems.
Yep.
You all stressed the importance of value alignment and trust. And I'm just wondering, through this process, did your teams evolve any kind of protocols or best practices for how to make sure that you're making decisions that are aligned and that you're communicating that to the owner? I imagine that at every decision there's sort of a value proposition. You're going to have a contractor that says this is too expensive, or you might have an architect that say this is really important to the people living here. And just wondering if you established any effective communication or decision-making protocols?
You want to take that?
Yes, I think back to something Bennett said earlier is we're going to the owner with a consolidated solution where we're on the same page. And so obviously that means that we have to negotiate and come to some agreement beforehand. And that's where understanding where the contractor's sitting with the budget or with what the subcontractor pool or whatever the issue might be, knowing that from them in outside of like in front of the client, like, you know, not to other the client, but like being able to have honest conversations with the contractor where you're not worried about how it's going to look to the person footing the bill or who hired you, where you can have those difficult conversations really helps you be able to come to the client with like, we've already talked through it. Here are our pros and cons. This is what we recommend. And so, yeah, before every OAC, there's a pre-meeting or there's a conversation or there's, you know, there's making sure we're on the same page. That is super important. I don't know if we have like best practices of like, this is exactly how we do it. But being on the same page going into that room is always a priority.
Just to add on to that, that also kind of goes back to having, you know, an owner that has clear goals in mind, because really having those strong goals gives you that touchstone to say, okay, something might cost more, but it's very important to the owner's goal versus, you know, something that would look really cool, but would also cost a lot, but doesn't necessarily serve the purpose that we're trying to create with the building. So.
And I think the other thing on that, I think Hillsborough is a good example of is when we, you know, when at each milestone budget, we have talked with Holst and come up with, okay, we're 500,000 over budget, for example. How can we get the project back to budget? So we're coming to those budget update meetings with examples that we've agreed on as a team that will work, that will still hit the critical mission items of the owner, but that will get, you know, hit the budget at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add to that I think having, you know, someone like Ally or the GC team sit in those early conversations around programming and hearing, even the outreach conversations we had, some of the community engagement conversations we had, like they never lost sight of what was important to the project. So it wasn't just numbers and dollars at the end of the day, it was values-based decisions, even on that GC side. So we didn't, I think it eased some of that argument, you know, that argument that can happen when you're just like, oh, the hard facts around the numbers. They really understood what was needed in the project from the beginning. So I think it added that humanistic touch to like the budget conversations even.
Thank you. I really enjoy hearing about this collaboration that we've been talking about. I've been in CA for 5 of the 6 years I've been doing development, and I sometimes feel like I'm playing babysitter between the architect and the contractor and getting them to actually negotiate. So unfortunately, a lot of my projects are already pretty baked. You know, these have 5 to 6 year lifespans, so I can't just turn around and immediately do design build. So what are some suggestions you might have for how we can start to get that communication happening, even though I can't do design build yet?
A good question. Any takers?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting situation we've set up in our industry with the three-legged stool where, you know, the client is hiring the contractor, hiring the architect, and then kind of hoping they can work, hoping for the best, right? In some ways, it seems kind of odd if you think about it. So when we've had, you know, moments of tension or pinch points on projects between the architect and the contractor, I don't think it should be the client's job to solve that problem. I think that we all come to this industry as professionals and we all should act that way. And so I think setting clear expectations as an owner of this is what we need to get this project done. But also giving them the freedom to go work it out. Like, I actually think that can be really healthy. And sometimes clients don't want the contractor and architect talking when they're not there. I mean, sometimes it's like foreboding, you know? So, I think giving permission and setting expectations of what you need to be successful in your project would be really helpful. I don't know if you've tried that, but that's what I would recommend.
I think the other thing maybe to consider is some design build projects will have incentives related to the working relationship, the results. So maybe that might be something to try to incentivize in a CMGC environment, the working relationship that we have on a design build partnership, potentially. Yeah.
I have a question about how you set your owner goals and how, I guess, how much time did it take for you to create these, and how much stakeholder engagement did you have in creating the owner goals?
Start with that one.
As far as goals, I mean, as for stakeholder, so we involve, when we're doing like occupied rehabs and stuff, we involve our residents quite a bit. And we have them there from the very beginning in programming, doing focus groups. And then we've involved neighborhood involvement too, when it's a project that has has a lot of surrounding property.
But I think, like a lot of the home forward procurement for the occupied renovations is just as simple as we have $15 million. We think we want to do maybe a high level number of items, but then really the first 3 to 4 months is really just intensive programming. It's meeting with residents, maintenance people, resident services, all sorts of stakeholders to really, to Dave's earlier point, creating an exhaustive list that probably well over 15 million in things that the building could use. And then as a team, working that down to something that's going to fit the budget and hit those kind of major 5 items that Dave spoke to earlier, safe exiting, occupancy, health and safety, I think it was, energy efficiency and opportunity.
Yeah, it's prioritizing that. And that's kind of at the very beginning. Yeah. So you have all that whole list of things, and then saying, this is number 1, this is number 2, this one's number 3. And then seeing how far you can go down the budget. And then the rest become add backs, right?
Yeah. I think we had a question back there.
Yeah.
We'll go as long as they want, right?
I just wanted to add,
Okay.
just as totally piggybacking on that, where does the CNA fit into that priority of goals? And the fact that like the capital needs assessment, and then also if there's like lender requirements, like one of the things I was thinking about, why I asked about the private financing is because of like probable maximum loss scenarios, and if you're doing a voluntary upgrade versus just dealing with seismic, and the private markets lending community is very risk averse, yada yada yada.
Yeah, we have been lucky that we can do voluntary seismic on these projects.
Yeah, so for some of the projects, we were involved in the critical needs assessment early on as a consultant. In other projects, other consultants had done CNAs. And so, but that is a piece that came before the design build procurement. So that gave Home Forward like at least an idea of what they should be doing in these buildings. I forgot the second question about lenders.
like voluntary or
Well, that was when the
non-voluntary.
code required came in. Not just codes, but also things that are required by, what Home Forward has to get done. Like what their facilities folks need to have fixed in this building. And so there were some like non-negotiables that we had to do, whether they came from the jurisdiction or from the client. And then there were the other things that we kind of negotiated.
Yeah, the seismic was voluntary. We didn't have to do that, but we decided that it was an important thing to make the buildings not necessarily livable after a large earthquake, but at least to get the residents out. Yeah. And those came with hefty price tags too.
Mhm. Any other questions? All right, well, appreciate everyone's time. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thank you.